We have built our firm around one idea: to lead our clients from where they are to where they want to be. But the ability to deliver the leadership and service our clients deserve doesn't happen by chance. It's a product of who we are. We are engaged, diverse, and innovative thinkers who go above and beyond what is expected because we know our efforts will carry us to achievements others never thought possible. We are unafraid to take the necessary risks that lead to new successes. We embrace change because we know sound principles will guide us through new opportunities. We are committed to empowering our people, our clients, and our communities to become every part of what they aspire to be. We are persistent on our journey forward. It is our openness to collaboration, our desire to achieve better, our character, our vision, and most of all, our people that make us who we are. That's the HB difference. We are Husch Blackwell.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Ben Cass, partner in Husch Blackwell's Renewable Energy Group, and my practice involves specialized contracts in the renewable energy industry, including construction, equipment supply, and power purchase agreements. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your audience console, there are multiple application icons for your use during the program today. If you have any questions during the webcast, please submit via the question box. We will try to answer all questions during the webcast today, but if a fuller answer is needed, or if we run out of time, we are happy to follow up by email. A PDF of the presentation is available in the Resources folder. This program has been approved for continuing legal education hours, and to report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. Toward the end of the program, be sure to complete our short survey. We use your feedback to plan future programs that are applicable to your business needs. That is all for housekeeping items, so let's get started with our program. Joining me today is Michal Baithani and Chris Reeder. Michal focuses her practice in the renewable energy sector and works with some of the country's largest and most innovative wind, solar, and storage developers. She has extensive experience with drilling title opinions and other title and survey issues. Chris Reeder has been practicing for 28 years, concentrating in the area of administrative law with an emphasis in matters pertaining to energy and natural resources. He represents participants in numerous areas of the electric industry, including competitive retail providers, independent power producers, power marketers, investor-owned and public power utilities, and investors, lenders, and customers. So again, thanks for joining us today. We have quite a bit of information to cover as we will be providing you with a comprehensive overview of emerging issues across the energy storage industry. We will be discussing the state of the industry, including an overview of the different energy storage technologies, use cases, and some example revenue structures. We will be talking about 3 different case studies of recent energy storage projects that Husch Blackwell attorneys have been involved in. We will be discussing construction and operation issues, including warranty and equipment procurement, some siting issues and local issues that are unique to energy storage, an overview of recent regulatory issues and developments, and an overview of some unique real estate issues that we've encountered in standalone storage projects. So here's an overview of storage in the U.S. through Q3 of 2020. And the takeaway here, if you've been following the storage industry this year, is the exponential growth we have seen in 2020. As noted in the sentence highlighted in yellow, front-of-the-meter storage installations in Q3 of 2020 have exceeded all other total installations across all segments over the past 7 years. And if you follow industry news, you know that there are a ton of new installations scheduled in 2021 and 2022 and onward, as we continue to see lender acceptance of the technology and drops in CapEx costs. So here at Husch Blackwell, we have been similarly busy on the energy storage front. We have worked on approximately 600 megawatts of energy storage projects in several states across the country, including New York, Hawaii, Ohio, Texas, and Colorado. These projects have included both utility-scale wind and solar paired with storage components, as well as utility-scale standalone storage projects. We've also seen deployment of standalone and solar-coupled storage in behind-the-meter projects, as well as some interesting microgrid projects with the storage component. So when we talk about energy storage, what exactly are we talking about? Well, primarily we are talking about large installations of lithium-ion batteries, similar to what you might find in your phone, your computer, or your Tesla automobile. They are most often installed in two different configurations. The top picture shows a typical warehouse installation with racks of battery modules stored in a large on-site building. The bottom picture shows a typical containerized system, which has smaller sets of battery modules. These shipping containers are typically pre-assembled and shipped to site, and each contain individual HVAC and fire suppression systems. While lithium-ion technology is the most commercially accepted battery storage technology at the moment, there are other technologies that are worth a brief mention. Flow batteries are an up-and-coming technology utilizing large tanks of a liquid electrolyte solution that is used to pull electrons across a membrane. The advantage to a flow battery is that there are no perceived heat or fire issues. And energy storage does not need to be limited to batteries. Flywheel and pumped air and water storage have been around for quite some time, but are not utilized as often for a variety of reasons, including commercial acceptance and location issues. So by far the most exciting thing about battery storage is the incredible range of different uses or use cases. So these are just a few. Flexible peaking resource, so a battery that can be discharged in times of peak demand in lieu of dirty and more expensive gas peaker or diesel peaker power plants. We worked on an interesting peak demand project for Con Edison a few years ago in Brooklyn and Queens, New York, where Con Edison was using strategic battery storage resources to deal with summertime air conditioning use between 4 and 7 p.m. By utilizing battery storage, Con Edison was able to avoid spending close to $1 billion on new traditional peaker resources. The next is frequency regulation or transmission support. Battery storage can be used for a variety of grid stability functions by being able to charge or discharge in a matter of seconds and help with stabilizing power on the grid as well as alleviating congestion. Demand shifting is one of the more popular uses of energy storage, and this involves either storing solar power for use storing solar power generated during the day for use during the nighttime hours, or shifting stored nighttime wind power to high-need daytime hours. The next, merchant or arbitrage. There are many different merchant applications, but this includes playing in the energy market by charging the battery with cheap power and then discharging power, producing or providing capacity or other ancillary services in the market at times when power is most expensive or most needed. Paired with generation, all of the use cases in this slide can be either done as standalone projects or paired with a wind or solar facility to help maximize the power generated from that facility. Ramp rate control, we will revisit this one a little later in one of our case studies, but ramp rate control involves ensuring that generation resources don't come on too strong or too quickly to overwhelm the grid infrastructure. Electric storage for plug-in vehicles. Electric vehicles and charging stations themselves could be an entire presentation by themselves. We have a client in London that is currently working on a contracted project to convert all of the buses in London, including double-decker buses, to battery-powered electric vehicles. And finally, microgrids. We've worked on some unique microgrid projects, including involving a battery component for rural and agricultural industrial facilities in Colorado. This slide provides a brief overview of just some of the revenue structures we are seeing currently in the market, although this is by no means an exhaustive list. So for those that are paired with generation like wind or solar, it can be as simple as building the price for the storage facility into the PPA price. For those projects that are paired with either wind or solar, so these typically work where the utility has either mandated the use of storage, such as in Hawaii, and we will get to that in one of our case studies, or otherwise where the use case validates a pricing adder for storage. Hybrid PPA plus price plus ancillary services revenue. We've seen projects where the cost of the energy storage component was partially supported by the PPA price, while other revenue generation was accomplished through providing ancillary services that are compensated through payments under the various regimes existing through the ISO or RTO. And in the C&I context, we've seen use paired with solar, on-site solar, for demand charge avoidance. And we've worked on a couple of these on-site storage projects for industrial customers. So some utilities charge a steep demand charge to industrial customers that use a lot of power during peak times of the day. In this case, the storage system charges during non-peak times and discharges during peak times to provide power to the industrial users so they don't have to pull power from the grid. The project owner and the industrial user then share the cost savings. For standalone storage, capacity sales agreement, here the project owner receives a capacity payment that is a fixed dollar amount per megawatt in exchange for an obligation to be ready to charge or discharge into the grid when called upon by the utility or the transmission operator. Typically, only the capacity is contracted, leaving the system open to earning additional revenue by providing ancillary services in the wholesale market. Energy storage as service agreements, and we will talk about these in our case studies, but this structure involves the project owner developing, constructing, owning, and maintaining the storage project, but selling the services or use of that storage project to a utility. VEDR and incentives, we will talk about these in our case study examples as well, but these typically involve state law and utility programs where project owners are paid for various services the energy storage project is able to provide in relation to the need for those services by the utility. And then finally, merchant projects. In areas of the country where we are seeing robust, or where there are robust and sophisticated liquid energy markets, we are seeing at least a few partially or even full merchant projects where the unique location and use case for that project can support a financial model for the capital expenditure. So the first case study is a wind plus solar project that we worked on back in 2018. This project was originally built in 2008 and was one of the first commercial battery storage projects installed at a wind facility. The original system was a lead-acid battery, or in other words, really the same technology that you would see in your car. So essentially a bunch of car batteries hooked together. And so in 2018, with the original battery supplier out of business, our client undertook a project to modernize the battery system for more reliable operation. So this was potentially one of the first repowers of a battery storage system, and we handled the EPC, equipment supply, and other related agreements. The most pressing use case for battery storage on island grids like Hawaii is ramp rate control in addition to demand shifting. Because the grid area in islands systems like Hawaii is relatively small and has a high percentage of renewable energy resources, battery storage is critical to ensuring reliable baseload power and to ensure that when the wind kicks up, that the grid isn't overwhelmed with an instantaneous surge of energy. So our experience has been that most of the Hawaiian utilities, at least the ones that we have worked with in Maui and Oahu, mandate that most new large renewable energy storage projects have a storage component to ensure grid reliability. The second case study is a solar plus storage project in the Northeast U.S. The state of New York has been at the forefront of new solar and storage incentive programs arising from some recent legislative mandates. One of these incentive programs specifically applies to distributed solar and solar plus storage projects of 5 megawatts or less. We are currently assisting clients in developing and building projects under these programs. One of the unique aspects of this incentive program is the revenue structure. The program involves a subscription program where owners of these facilities are paid based on VDER, or value of distributed resources. And this is a value stack formula where the project is paid not just on the electrons generated, but on a suite of grid services unique to each project, including capacity benefits, environmental benefits, demand reduction value, and locational system relief value based on where the system is located within the NYISO grid and where it is able to assist with locational-based congestion constraints. The third case study is one of several standalone projects that we have worked on in the last few years. This program is also in New York, but it's under a different incentive program, the Bulk Storage Incentive Program. This program focuses on utility-scale standalone storage from 5 megawatts on up, in some cases up to 100 and 200 megawatts. Prior to this program, we have worked on standalone battery storage projects that were ultimately developed and constructed for purchase and long-term ownership by the utility itself, both in Ohio and New York. Here, NYSERDA, which is the state regulatory and incentive agency, and utilities instead want the project company to develop, construct, own, and operate the storage facility, and then sell the services of that storage facility to the utility under an energy storage service agreement. And this ESSA would allow the utility to control the charge and discharge of the storage asset as needed over the term. The revenue structure under this program involves one lump sum payment to the project developer upon achievement of substantial completion, and then additional payments and incentives throughout the term of the ESSA. So this next slide provides just a high-level overview of some of the construction and operation issues that are unique to battery storage as opposed to wind or solar assets. The information on this slide could easily fill an entire presentation on its own, and maybe we will do one in the future if there's interest. The key components of any battery storage construction contract include the balance of plant, so all the civil and electrical infrastructure necessary for the project, the battery components, which includes HVAC, fire suppression, and inverters, and the software controls, which are perhaps one of the most important elements. While project owners would far prefer to have one turnkey solution for all of these components, we are seeing more split EPC contracts with different service providers bringing different elements of the system. When the elements of the contract are split among one or more providers, you run the risk of gaps in warranty coverage, gaps in scope of work, and the potential for finger pointing between contractors. So there needs to be special attention paid to the contract to minimize these types of risks. For warranties, in addition to your typical workmanship warranty covering labor and equipment under the project, it is also standard to have a battery degradation warranty from the battery supplier, which warrants state of charge guarantees and that the batteries can hold a certain amount of energy for a given period of time. These warranties, like those we are seeing for solar panels, should typically match the length of the project term. Similarly, HVAC and fire suppression systems should have longer-term warranties, and all components of the system should meet applicable requirements and standards as measured both by applicable law and by prudent industry practices. For performance guarantees, as compared to wind and solar, the performance guarantees for battery storage projects are typically much more robust and complex and should cover a series of metrics to ensure the battery can perform as intended for the proposed use case for as long as possible, typically for the entire length of the term. Despite what your battery supplier may initially argue, we find it typical for there to be guaranteed response time requirements for warranty work. So in other words, there should be specific contract language ensuring that if there's a warranty issue, your point of contact for that warranty commences a cure within a reasonably short specified period of time and completes that cure within a specified period of time. these response times are not met, or if the project incurs a certain predetermined amount of unexpected downtime, the supplier would then be liable to the project owner for liquidated damages. As far as software and controls, the software is often referred to as the brain of the system and is crucial to the proper operation and fulfillment of the use case for a battery storage project. Some providers will sell the hardware and software components to the project owner, while others provide access through a subscription service. For projects that sell or license the product to the project company, it is typical to enter into a software escrow agreement where the source code for the software is deposited with a third-party escrow agent. And if the software supplier were to ever go bankrupt or fail to perform the warranty work, the project owner could tap the escrow agent and receive the source code to try to effectuate their own fix of the issue. As to citing and some local issues, we wanted to provide a couple of examples of issues that are unique to battery storage as opposed to wind or solar. First, there are some noise impacts associated with battery storage projects. While much quieter than gas plants or diesel generators, there is a noticeable hum from the HVAC systems and from the modules and inverters when charging and discharging. We worked on an energy storage project in a densely populated urban area where the project was to be located near some existing homes. There was some zoning and local approval challenges related to sound suppression that needed to be overcome. In addition, in states such as California, where there are state-level environmental review laws, we have seen noise impacts evaluated even on rural projects where there was the potential for impacts to certain sensitive species. And fire suppression, after some recent and unfortunate high-profile fires at battery storage facilities, we have seen changes to local building codes requiring increased fire suppression measures. These have been most recently implemented in New York and require multiple meetings and sign-off from the FDNY. Additionally, in Arizona, after a battery fire there has been also an implementation of similar requirements, and the impetus is really on both the fire suppression system and assisting local fire departments in understanding how to respond and effectively deal with the chemicals on site in the unlikely event of a fire. And so now I will turn it over to my partner, Chris Reeder, who will be discussing regulatory issues.
Hey, thanks a lot, Ben, and I appreciate everybody who's tuned in or maybe listening after the fact on the recording. Before I get rolling too deep into this, I just want to acknowledge that one of our other attorneys, Landon Lill, who I hope some of y'all at least have had a chance to work with, has really helped me a lot on putting these slides together and assembling some of this information. So I did want to acknowledge Landon's role, and as I say, I hope that some of y'all, all of you, get a chance to work with Landon at some point. In my time, I want to just kind of lay out the overall regulatory framework that the FERC has been establishing for the last couple of years, more than the last couple of years, that is applicable to storage insofar as its integration into and participation within wholesale markets within FERC jurisdiction. There's been kind of a suite of FERC rulings, and the implementation of those is still kind of a work in progress, but it's being ironed out, and it's affording storage a greater opportunity to participate in these markets. ERCOT is mostly outside of this due to FERC's jurisdictional limitations. ERCOT has not made anywhere near the same progress that the FERC has from a regulatory perspective, although ERCOT institutionally is in the process of developing protocol changes and model changes that would follow in the path that FERC has been establishing. The first order, which is probably the most important and probably most of you are aware of out there, is FERC Order 841, dealing with energy storage resources. The FERC, after workshops, after investigation, made the finding that storage has been inhibited from participating in wholesale markets and from broader development due to kind of inconsistent regulatory treatment. Is it fish or fowl? Is it generation? Is it load? Is it both? Is it neither? When is it one or the other? And inconsistency in market rules applications, as between various RTOs and ISOs. So it opened a notice of proposed rulemaking in September of 2016, before the last election, and proposed to create uniform standards and procedures. The NOPR would have, or did, include not only storage, but distributed energy resources. But in the final rule, DERs, as I'll call them, was kind of severed or put into another order, which I will discuss later on. In the NOPR proceeding, the FERC found that this uncertainty that we mentioned has been inhibiting investment in storage and its development, has led to barriers to participation in wholesale markets, and the result was, and the key finding, it promoted unjust and unreasonable rates. So it adopted the final rule in February of 2018 that, as an overall matter, seeks to, from a policy standpoint, facilitate the equal and level participation in wholesale markets, both as a buyer and seller of energy storage resources in capacity, energy, and ancillary services markets, up to and accounting for the technical and operating capabilities of storage as a medium, as a resource medium. It applies to all wholesale markets under FERC's jurisdiction, and it has a very broad, I would say, kind of plain language definition of energy storage resource, which is in the PowerPoint. And I'd say the kind of the nut of the rule is in this third bullet point in the PowerPoint. It directs the ISOs and the RTOs to create what it termed participation models, allowing storage to participate fully in wholesale markets, to be dispatched, and to be able to set market clearing prices, and to account for and adjust for its technical and operational characteristics. It allowed the RSOs and ITOs to set a minimum size requirement for a resource, but that would not exceed 100 kW, and FERC kind of pointedly indicated it didn't want to sacrifice or prohibit kind of smaller scale installations from the ability to participate in markets. The devil is always in the details, and as I'll mention in one slide from now, the implementation and compliance tariffs have some kind of unique among the market's permutations that FERC has been navigating through. Before I get to those, let me continue the saga of 841. Various state and utility groups and representatives filed motions for rehearing, asked for revisions on the essential arguments that the rule, by affording an opportunity for distribution level storage to participate in wholesale markets and to allow that type of access, it infringed upon the jurisdiction reserved to the states to regulate their own distribution systems. That these interests argued that FERC couldn't expand its jurisdiction or infringe upon state jurisdiction, that the states have the exclusive right to regulate interconnections at the distribution level. The FERC rejected that argument, emphasizing that it was focusing exclusively on its jurisdiction to regulate the terms of access to wholesale markets, which is sort of the sine qua non of FERC jurisdiction, and to specify when resources are able to participate and how to do so, and clarified the rule accordingly, but did indicate kind of as additional clarification that states are free to continue to regulate retail storage applications and retail customer relationships, as well as the terms for distribution level interconnection of distributed storage. On appeal to the federal D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, the court upheld the rule, found it valid, found that states cannot block storage, prohibit storage from participating in wholesale markets. It did clarify, however, that the states could prohibit simultaneous participation in intrastate or retail markets and interstate markets. So at any given time, you've got to pick one or the other, or at least the states have the authority to do that or to require that. The court rejected arguments by the states that they would have the right to opt out of 841's provisions and to not allow distribution level storage within their boundaries to participate as the plaintiffs had requested. Yet, on the other hand, the court confirmed that the states can continue to regulate distributed storage for things like safety regulations, can continue to apply, permitting requirements, just as it would to other kind of equivalent applications. This whole framework kind of rests upon a number of interacting jurisdictions among the states and the federal level that cannot, really be precisely spelled out. And I would suspect there will continue to be litigation either at the FERC or even in the courts as to exactly where those boundaries are. I mentioned the implementation process. The FERC required the ISOs and the RTOs to submit tariff revisions reflecting that it had established terms and conditions of access that constitute the required participation models. All the ISOs and RTOs did submit such filings. They've all achieved either final approval in the one case, or at least conditional approval, and are basically winding up through the FERC review process. In the next 3 slides, I've tried to lay out some of the unique features of these implementation tariffs. Let me just state, kind of from an overall perspective, they're mostly still pending final approval. The Cal ISO is pretty much final, though. They all have various effective dates. Some are effective now, such as PJM, and so those terms are in effect. As a general matter, they do apply or allow the RTOs and ISOs to apply transmission charges to storage in its load capability or load capacity, although there are some exceptions, such as in the Cal ISO, which are set forth in the PowerPoint. For purposes of this discussion, I wanted to highlight a couple of things. One is in MISO. You see bullet points there saying that MISO, with FERC approval, has created this entity called a transmission-only asset, or a storage transmission-only asset, in which storage can be installed on the system and put into rate base, transmission rate base, to the extent that it can function as an alternative to or fulfilling the same function as a new transmission asset. This was a subject of some dispute and controversy. Some of the independent storage companies that would focus really just on participating in wholesale markets advocated that this was really just kind of a subsidy to other storage developers with whom these utilities would probably either partner or would acquire late-stage developments, and would tend to create difficulties and barriers in achieving financing or investment, even though they're not allowed to participate in the wholesale markets if they have that transmission-only function. They nonetheless would constitute other, investment opportunities or other storage applications, but would not pay transmission charges at the same time the wholesale storage applications would. So that was a matter of some controversy. Another item that I wanted to identify here for our presentation is the PJM 10-hour rule. This is, I understand, to be somewhat unique to PJM, which has adopted a requirement that for participation of storage, really of all resources in the capacity market, but specifically as to storage, that the capacity payments to be afforded a eligible storage resource would be calculated based upon its abilities and energy abilities to discharge continuously over a 10-hour period, as opposed to a similar requirement that's imposed for wind and solar assets, which is only for a 4-hour period. Those are all intermittent resources, but for wind and solar, they would be measured, just over a much shorter period, and as a result, storage will probably be derated for purposes of capacity payments, whereas wind and solar would be much more likely to realize capacity payments based upon their nameplate capacity. This did result in dispute. The FERC has not approved this rule. It's still involved in proceedings at the FERC, and also I understand that PJM has convened stakeholder discussions on the possibility of adopting an alternative to the rule. In Cal-ISO, I've mentioned already a couple of times by name, they were kind of held up as a model for these participation models because their tariffs already pretty much accommodated most of the same principles embodied in Order 841, so required very few changes. Cal-ISO does, however, prohibit storage that's behind a retail meter and more than likely on the distribution system from participating in its wholesale markets, but due to some netting and other requirements can still participate as a proxy demand resource and reliability demand response resource. And finally, as I mentioned, is also studying the concept of the transmission-only storage asset. We'll skip past the remainder of these tariff filing slides and then proceed to talk about a couple of other FERC orders which also address the implementation of storage or integration of storage into wholesale markets. One is order number 2222, Distributed Energy Resource Aggregation, which was adopted in September of this year on a 2-to-1 vote. This applies not simply to storage, but to any resource located on a distribution system or a subsystem thereof or behind a customer meter. So it's very broad, and it takes into account many different technologies and allows for the aggregation of those types of resources into what's called a DER aggregator, which can then participate in wholesale markets on kind of an equal basis with other resources and on a full basis in capacity, energy, and ancillary services markets. It, similar to 841, requires RTOs and ISOs to revise their tariffs, again, to create a participation model, allowing DER aggregators to participate in markets. It establishes also a minimum size requirement not to exceed 100 kW. Clarifies this is for the entire aggregation, not per particular resource that's included within an aggregation. Otherwise, it might eliminate some of these rooftop solar or community solar type resources from being able to participate. So casts kind of a wide swath and tries to maximize participation of some of these newer technologies and newer applications in wholesale markets. It prohibits DER aggregators from bidding in demand response of retail customers, and it also authorizes the RTOs and ISOs to account for so-called double counting, which is where DER resources are already receiving some sort of payment based on some other kind of program that might be prevailing within the applicable states. It doesn't require that, but allows that. Finally, it clarifies that interconnection remains a matter that's subject to state and local jurisdiction. And while it doesn't allow an opt-out for states, it does afford so-called small utilities an opt-in right. So if you're a small utility, and that's a utility that has under 4 million megawatt hours of generation in a preceding fiscal year, you are not automatically included and have the ability to opt in. And from what I can tell, that's going to be a lot of your electric co-ops. Final thing on this is that the rule is becoming effective, I believe it's 90 days after its publication in the Federal Register, and then 270 days after that, the RTOs and ISOs have to submit compliance tariffs. So that has not happened yet. That'll happen mid to third quarter of next year. So that process continues to evolve. The third FERC order, and sorry to be kind of rushing through it, but I'll just mainly stand on what's in the slide, is the requirement that the electric storage exhibit primary frequency response. This is something that's applied to most generation resources, and order number 842 applies a primary frequency response requirement on storage as well. Much like with generation applications, it establishes a deadband through which or within which the storage facility does not have to respond to frequency changes. And it applies the requirement to storage within its declared minimum and maximum state of charge as specified in its interconnection agreement. It's not necessary that the facility have to switch from or between charging and injecting unless it's necessitated by its designated deadband and droop settings, as well as if the facility is technically capable of making that switch to respond to primary frequency changes. Okay, so I've gone a little bit longer than I had planned. This slide talks about what I would characterize as still kind of an evolving, or if you want to be less charitable, kind of a murky regulatory framework for ERCOT. In ERCOT, storage is still treated as both generation for some purposes and load, or load resource for other purposes. At the PUC's regulatory level, it's classified as wholesale storage load and is to be exempted from some charges that would otherwise apply to retail loads. But storage must register with the PUC as a power generation company and with ERCOT as a resource if it intends to sell electricity at wholesale, or in the case of ERCOT, if it's going to put power on the transmission system. If storage is under a megawatt, and if it's not going to be settled, then it need not register with either, but unregistered storage is simply netted against customer load. To be settled, you'd have to register with ERCOT as a settlement-only generator. The Commission has rules that speak to a distributed generator, which is under 10 megawatts, or a distributed renewable generator, which is under 2 megawatts, and clarify instances in which those generators or those facilities can make direct sales to customers, specifies the interconnection process and its ability to make those sales, and speaks to interconnection studies. There's very little, almost if any, storage on the ERCOT transmission system, but there's over 17,000 megawatts of projects in the ERCOT queue, and that's not considering distributed level storage. I've gone much too long, and I think that it would be best for everybody if we could hear from Michelle. So let me pass the reins over to her, and appreciate it, everybody. I'm very gratified that you were able to find time to tune in to today's webinar. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. As Ben mentioned in the introduction, my practice area deals with renewable energy real estate due diligence for renewable energy projects, including wind, solar, and mostly standalone energy storage. Energy storage projects, the real estate due diligence involved with them is generally similar to the type of due diligence that would be done with solar projects. However, there are some unique real estate considerations, especially when you are looking at standalone facilities. The first is that standalone energy storage projects tend to be quicker than solar and wind projects. Standalone energy storage facilities require significantly smaller tracts of land. I've mostly dealt with 5 to 25 acres at most, as opposed to hundreds, even thousands of acres of land that are needed for solar or wind projects. So the acquisition of land rights tend to be much faster due to the smaller footprint, and because you are generally dealing with one landowner as opposed to several. Solar and wind projects, or a combination of energy and solar, energy and wind, generally have tax equity investors, so the project developers spend several years developing the project, and financing can take a considerable amount of time. Currently, storage units are only eligible for the investment tax credit if installed at the same time as a solar energy project. There is a push for a standalone investment tax credit for energy storage. However, that may only be forthcoming if there's a shift in Senate control. So we'll see what happens in the next several months with respect to that that investment tax credit. Energy storage facilities can be located almost anywhere near an existing substation and can be located in urban areas, with the exception of rooftop solar. Wind and solar projects, for the most part, have to be located in rural areas. With respect to battery storage, there's actually quite a bit of demand for these facilities in large urban areas to assist with the grid, especially in California, LA, San Francisco, Sacramento. However, as Ben mentioned earlier in his slides, urban development comes with additional barriers to entry, such as permitting, zoning, subdivision, if a tract is being purchased in fee, and different types of regulations, including noise and nuisance regulations, and all of the numerous studies that are related thereto. Another consideration, or a unique consideration, is transmission lines. In wind projects, you generally have to go, you do have to go where the wind is, and then there's usually lengthy transmission lines that connect the wind project to wherever the substation may be. For standalone energy storage, you can build a facility immediately adjacent to the substation, often, eliminating the need for lengthy transmission lines. The next one is the ability to conduct fee purchase transactions. Due to the size of the tracts required for standalone energy storage projects, project companies have the ability to purchase the applicable property in fee rather than just obtain lease or easement rights. In many areas in Texas, you can purchase property for less than you would pay over the lifetime of the lease, including any extension terms. Of course, in other areas of the country, such as the Northeast or California, fee purchases may be cost prohibitive and leases are more practical. However, as with anything, fee purchases do carry certain risks. Given the shortened timelines for fee purchases, there's a risk that project companies may end up with unusable land or may end up expending significant funds on option payments for property they ultimately decide not to purchase. Whereas leases often have a lengthy due diligence period whereby the project company can terminate the lease without penalty. Additionally, fee purchases may carry an upfront cost, which is the purchase price. With respect to mineral rights with solar energy projects, project companies typically have to obtain a mineral ownership report, which is done by a landman detailing the mineral ownership underneath a particular tract of land to determine, in order to obtain surface waivers, whereby the mineral owners state that they will not disturb the project in an effort to realize their mineral development rights. In battery storage, this is a fairly novel concept for many title companies who are mostly accustomed to dealing with just solar or just wind, where there are more established rules. So depending on the title company, you may get different answers with respect to what may be required. Some title companies require mineral ownership reports and surface waivers regardless of the location of the project, where others may not. Some may only require the MOR, the mineral ownership report, or surface waivers in rural areas. However, as a practical matter, given the smaller footprint of standalone battery storage, it seems unlikely or a very low risk that a mineral owner or a mineral lessee would want to drill on that exact 5-acre tract. So there is much less of a risk than there would be with a solar project, which covers significant acreage. I would like to move on next to title issues with respect to mostly standalone storage and Texas, which is where most of my expertise or most of my my projects have taken place. The first thing I wanted to start out with is policy amount. This is dictated by a Texas insurance procedural rule, which is P66, which indicates that the total amount of the insurance is either A, the total amount of the rentals payable under the lease, which includes any extension terms, the value of the land and any existing improvements, or C, the value of the land and any existing improvements and the cost of improvements immediately contemplated to be erected on the project area. Generally, project companies would want to go with A or C because most of these projects are being developed on either vacant or unimproved land. The cost of, with respect to C and the cost of improvements immediately contemplated on the site, most title companies have interpreted this to mean the construction of permanent improvements, and they have excluded the cost of removable items such as the batteries themselves, which has been a little tricky with it, getting an adequate policy amount. Additionally, a lot of times the title policy amount will be based on the improvements that have not yet been built, which can be proved by an EPC contractor indicating on a letter, stating that the cost of permanent improvements will be, X amount, and the title companies will usually accept that as evidence. But as I will mention quickly on a later slide, that comes with additional complications and additional considerations rather as opposed to when a policy is just based on the cost of the land, the fee purchase, or the lease payments. In Texas, with standalone battery storage policies, you generally want to obtain a certain endorsements. I won't go through them in detail. I'll just kind of list them off. One is the T4, which is the Texas Leasehold Owners Policy. T23, which is the Access Endorsement, which is only available on improved non-residential property. So a lot of times it's not available where there's not even a fence or any sort of building on the property. The next would be an area and boundary exception amendment or the survey exception amendment. The contiguity endorsement, T25, which is available when the policy covers 2 or more tracts of land. The minerals and surface damage endorsement, T19.2. The restrictions, encroachments, and mineral endorsement, T19.1. And finally, the deletion of arbitration provision, which is a free endorsement whereby a project company retains its right to sue the title company in the case of a dispute or a claim. As I mentioned earlier, one point I wanted to make was if you obtain a title policy prior to the completion of improvements, there's a couple of ways that you can go about it. One is ensuring the project prior to the commencement of construction for the full value of the project after the construction has been completed. At that point in time, the title company's liability will be limited to, at the beginning, if there's nothing on the property, the value of the land or rental payments, and it will increase steadily as infrastructure is built on the property. Alternatively, a policy can be obtained based on just the rental payments, and then further down the line, when the improvements are constructed, that policy based on the rental payments, or the land value can be turned in. Credit can be received for the policy amount paid, and a new policy can be issued on the total value of the improvements. If a policy is obtained prior to the completion of improvements, based on those improvements, a completion of improvements endorsement, a T3, will be required 180 days after the completion of improvements in order to ensure for the full value, and also to remove the mechanics lien exception, which accepts from coverage any and all liens arising by reason of unpaid bills or claims of work performed by any contractors or subcontractors. And just to quickly go back on affirmative coverage, this is something additional that title companies in Texas occasionally provide. It's usually the larger title companies, and it's coverage in addition to the minerals endorsements that I mentioned earlier, which is the T19.1 and T19.2, where the title company will insure the insured against loss, if any, sustained by the insured under the terms of the policy by reason of the enforcement of certain mineral rights. It's not always offered. It depends on the title company. I'll kind of quickly go through a couple of things. Generally, when a policy is obtained, a survey also needs to be obtained. An ALTA, which is an American Land Title Associate survey, is not always required. However, if an ALTA survey is needed, these are the listed Table 8 items is what we would recommend obtaining on the survey. I've unfortunately run out of time, but I quickly wanted to do this poll question, which is for those in the renewable energy field, what types of projects do you most frequently work on? Wind, solar, storage combined, which is wind or storage, or solar and storage. I'll give everyone a little bit of time to submit this question. Okay, it looks like solar is the vast majority, followed by wind, and then by combined, which is wind storage or solar and storage. Before we end this presentation, I quickly wanted to touch on what the future of energy storage projects looks like. As indicated on the previous slide, a combined wind storage, solar storage is there's a bit more prevalence of that type of project as opposed to simply just storage, which is for many reasons. One being that the standalone battery storage, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't receive the investment tax credit, whereas opposed to co-location with another type of renewable project does. In addition to just the monetary gains you get with co-location, energy storage complements renewable energy projects with, in many ways, some of which that Ben mentioned earlier when you discussed demand shifting or load shifting, and how the combination of storage with wind or solar helps to maximize the project generation of a project. For example, wind or solar energy can be stored in the batteries and then discharged during times of high usage, or allows businesses to shift energy usage by charging batteries in solar energy or when electricity is cheapest, and then discharging the battery when it's most expensive. So these types of projects work very well together, and that appears to be what the future of energy storage projects will be. Thank you all for attending this webinar. Are there any questions before we conclude?
Hey, thanks, Michelle. Looks like we're just a little bit over time. So thanks for everybody for joining us today. We hope the information was helpful to you and your organization. We have received quite a few questions that we will respond to by email, and if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us by email or by phone. As a reminder, this program has been approved for continuing legal education hours. And to report your hours, click on the CEU icon at the bottom of the screen. A certificate of attendance, including course numbers, will be emailed to you tomorrow, along with a recording of the webcast for watching and sharing. Be sure to complete our short survey. We use your feedback to plan future programs that are applicable to your business needs. So this concludes our webinar, and thank you again. We really appreciate all of you attending today. Thanks.